Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. What could content moderation and IP legislation look like with AI-generated content? Joining me to discuss, we have Andrew Rossow. He's the founder and CEO of AR Media. He joins me to discuss. Andrew, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you for having me, Jill.
You got it. Right now, the content moderation conversation centers around whether we should have a uniform policy or comprehensive policy that addresses account portability and customizable curation, while also allowing for free speech. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is what governs content in the US. Should there be an exception that holds platforms liable for misinformation and hate speech that's promoted by algorithms?
That's a great question, Joe. And I think that's exactly where we are right now in terms of social media and our content online. On one hand, you have this argument that, look, these platforms are too big to be able to say we are responsible for everything a user may post. At the same time, depending on the speech that is posted, we're starting to see more and more instances where this type of content is actually creating harm, whether it's on the mental health side, whether it's on the brand and reputation side. There are so many questions that do beg the question of whether or not there should be legislation to actually govern this. And I do believe there is.
Tell us about Blue Sky's launch and its approach to global discoverability and content recommendations.
Blue Sky is the hot trending topic right now. And the reason being is it's decentralized social media. What does that mean? That means the ability for a user to take their account off any platform and migrate it to another service. So you don't have to start over. You don't have to build those followers up. But at the same time, people want to know how, when, and where to use their content. If there is something online that you and I don't like seeing, shouldn't we as a user be able to control how we see it, when we see it, and where we see it? That's what Blue Sky's approach is saying, look, we want this to be customizable. We want your account to be portable. If there is something you don't like about this particular service that Blue Sky and its protocol is offering, you have the ability or should have the ability to take your account elsewhere without being penalized, without being restricted, and being left with no options.
Are content moderation teams served better by humans or AI/machine learning, or is it going to be a blend of both?
You know, I think it's going to be a blend of both. And the reason being is what we have seen now is primarily that human element with the assistance in some extent, in some situations of that AI or that machine learning. The question that platforms like TikTok and Twitter and Facebook are all being presented with is how much human should be involved in the process, how much of that AI and the machine learning should be involved in being able to make these decisions, these determinations that govern what types of content you and I see every day and what we post.
Well, then you can also have the argument too, whether it's conscious or unconscious, any sort of biases or ethical concerns that go into the AI or the machine learning that would work with humans. And I guess it feels like you're almost going in this merry-go-round where you can argue for and against both sides because it's the input that's going to matter since it's just so subjective.
Very much so. And I think you said it exactly right. It's been this merry-go-round for so long. Why? Because machine learning has been around for quite some time. The problems that we're seeing now is how does AI come into that decision? And is there an abuse of this technology? You know, right now we have that 6-month moratorium that a bunch of tech leaders, including Elon Musk, have called upon to say, look, let's stop being so aggressive in the training of AI. We need to take a step back and look further into this. We need to do more research before people and brands and companies are starting to just throw everything at the wall and seeing what sticks, because there is that potential for abuse and misuse.
Yeah, I mean, we're struggling in Web 2.0 with the intermediaries that already exist to put this in the hands of so many content creators. I mean, you could see the can of worms that could open. So let's switch gears for a moment and talk about IP, right? Intellectual property. The AI generated Drake, The Weeknd song caused major concerns for labels. Can AI be sued for copyright infringement? And how would a plaintiff actually go about suing an AI defendant?
It is a great question, but it's a very, very big question. And it's going to take a lot of time, Jill, to get those answers that we want through copious amounts of litigation. Why? Under the Copyright Act, to be able to sue for infringement, you have to be able to sue an author of an original work. So the first question is, can an AI be a quote author under the act? Well, are they human or are they property? That is a very, very big question that, as you said, experts have been back and forth on for so long and still don't have that answer to. Assuming an AI is deemed as a human or a property, then you have to look and say, well, then how do I go about suing an AI?
I was thinking of that. I mean, how would you actually give notice to an AI defendant? And let's also talk about data privacy, right? Because the big conversation Web3 is the use, the training of AI with art, with music. I saw in your notes, how would you question states like California, Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, to comply with consumer privacy laws where businesses are leveraging AI-powered data and processing? It feels like the data privacy part of it is somewhat cut and dry relative to the other topics we covered, but is anything happening with that part of the law?
Right. And for right now, where we stand on the regulation side is the EU has GDPR. That is our global privacy framework. It's very comprehensive. It's very complex, which is problematic. At the same time, the US has the CCPA, or the California Consumer Privacy Act, very, very similar to GDPR, but governs the way our data as a consumer can be used, can be distributed, can or cannot be sold. The problem that we're seeing with this new emerging technology like AI and Web3 is that automatic decision making. Who gets to make it? Does an AI actually get to make that decision? Does that country or state even recognize AI to be able to have that conversation? So that is a big gap right now with these privacy frameworks that we see.
And of course, the EU, I believe it gets enacted in 2024, but they've passed the Digital Services Act, or what they call DSA, and that's really more around content moderation and what companies can and cannot do. Even companies that are involved with e-commerce, how they can interact with their consumers. I think really what the challenge is, that's actually a framework relative to a more substantial framework relative to what we have in the US. Do you think global standardization of what it looks like with privacy, with consumer protection, with content moderation could ever be a reality? I mean, if you think about the history behind it, we interpret free speech and data privacy very differently across different regions and cultures. I mean, do you think that could ever be a reality, standardization across the world?
I do. I think the question turns to, can standardization still be customizable? Can it still have that subjective element to it? Going back to our earlier conversation about, how these platforms, this decentralization comes into effect of, will there be a uniform way that everyone approaches it? No. But I do believe there is a uniform way or agreement of certain principles, certain ways of customization, certain abilities for a user or a consumer to say, if I don't like what you're doing, I still have the ability to take my stuff and go somewhere else without being penalized. And what we're seeing, even with this data regulation, is that countries and states will have to come together at some point. Why? Because, like you said, commerce, e-commerce has connected us all, whether we like it or not.
All right, Andrew, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you so much for having me.